At 32, Allison believed she had stepped into the life she once only dreamed of. Every morning she would wake to the gentle buzz of the suburbs just outside Seattle, a place where neighbors waved from their porches, children's bikes leaned against white fences, and the scent of pine drifted through the crisp air. Her home was modest, not extravagant, but it carried the warmth of fingerprints on glass doors, crayon marks across the refrigerator, and a swing set that squeaked under the joyful weight of her two little boys. Her husband Tom wasn't the type to make grand speeches about love, but he showed it in small, steady ways, fixing the leaky faucet before she even had to ask, turning off the lights after her when she forgot, kissing her forehead each night as if to say, "I'm here. You're safe." For Allison, that was more than enough. It was love not in fireworks, but in the steady flame of everyday life. To the outside world, she seemed blessed, a husband who came home on time, two healthy boys who adored story time and peanut butter sandwiches, and a life that many envied, but few could truly say they had. Sometimes when Allison tucked her children into bed and lingered in the doorway to watch them breathe, she felt her chest ache with gratitude. She would whisper to herself, "This is it. This is happiness." But what Allison didn't know, what she couldn't yet see, was that even the brightest picture can hide shadows in its corners. That beneath the polished smiles and Sunday dinners, something dangerous was stirring. A force that wore pearls around its neck, that greeted her with a gentle smile, and that would soon shatter everything Allison thought she knew about family. Grace Caldwell was the kind of woman who could charm a room the moment she stepped inside. Her hair, always perfectly styled into soft waves, carried the faint smell of lavender. A single strand of pearls graced her neck, gleaming under the light like a promise of elegance. She spoke softly with a voice that reminded people of church hymns and Sunday tea, and when she smiled, oh, that smile, it was the kind that could make strangers trust her instantly. To outsiders, Grace was the model of patience, dignity, and kindness. She baked pies for the church fundraiser, sent handwritten birthday cards to neighbors, and knew just the right words to soothe anyone in distress. People often whispered, "Tom is lucky to have a mother like her," and Allison even luckier to marry into that family. But Allison quickly learned that the shine of pearls often hides the cracks beneath. Grace's kindness wasn't soft, it was sharp like glass disguised as crystal. Her compliments carried a weight that pressed down instead of lifting up. Her questions seemed innocent, but cut just deep enough to bruise. And when no one was watching, when the polite audience was gone, that gentle smile tightened at the corners until it resembled something else entirely: control. Grace didn't scream. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. She wielded silence gestures and carefully chosen words like weapons, always subtle, always deniable. On the surface, she was the perfect mother-in-law. But Allison could already feel it. There was something dangerous hiding beneath the pearls and polite laughter. Something that would not stop until it consumed her. The first cracks appeared so quietly, Allison almost convinced herself she imagined them. At Sunday dinner, Grace would set the table with perfect precision, silverware-aligned napkins folded like swans. But when the food was served, something felt off. Tom's plate gleamed with a ribeye steak glistening in rosemary butter. Richard, the father, received salmon cooked to perfection, its skin crisp and golden. Allison's plate, however, looked different. A few steamed vegetables, pale and soggy, floating beside a clear broth that smelled faintly of dishwater. "Oh, you're watching your figure, right?" Grace would say with that flawless smile, as if she were doing Allison a favor. Allison had never mentioned her weight, never asked for diet food, but the words stuck to her like a stain she couldn't scrub away. It didn't stop there. On winter mornings, Grace would bring steaming cups of cocoa to the family, one for Tom, one for Richard, one for each of the boys. Allison's cup somehow was always missing. Grace would simply pat her hand and say, "Oh, I must have forgotten. I'll get you one next time," but there never was a next time. Christmas came, and with it a box of chocolates wrapped in golden foil. Grace passed them around the table with the same graceful smile. Tom's chocolates were rich Belgian truffles, Richard's a set of smooth caramels. When Allison unwrapped hers, she found an off-brand candy dust clinging to its edges, as though it had been left too long on a forgotten shelf. And then there were the photos. At her son's birthday party, Grace posted a picture captioned, "My 3 favorite people." It showed Tom, Richard, and the birthday boy, but Allison had been cropped out entirely as if she didn't belong. Each moment was small, easy to dismiss, easy to excuse. And Tom always did. She means well, Allie. That's just how mom shows love. But to Allison, it didn't feel like love. It felt like the slow tightening of a rope. She couldn't see a message whispered between the lines, "You are not one of us." It seemed like just another family dinner at Grace's house. The table glowed under the chandelier, polished silverware lined up with military precision, and the scent of rosemary and butter filled the room. Tom's plate was served first, a ribeye steak, seared perfectly, its juices glistening like something out of a restaurant commercial. Then came Richard's, a salmon fillet with crispy skin, paired with lemon wedges and a drizzle of olive oil. When the plate slid in front of Allison, her smile faltered. On it sat a small pile of steamed vegetables, limp and pale beside a bowl of watery broth. No seasoning, no flavor, nothing that resembled the love and care put into the other's meals. "Oh, you're watching your figure, aren't you?" Grace said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. The comment floated across the table like a joke, light enough to make everyone else chuckle, but heavy enough to land on Allison's shoulders like a stone. She hadn't mentioned her weight. She hadn't asked for diet food. Yet here she was, served last, her meal stripped of dignity. Tom, oblivious, cut into his steak, moaning at the taste. Richard complimented Grace's salmon, saying it was cooked to perfection. And Allison? She forced a smile, chewing on soggy carrots that tasted more like pity than kindness. She wanted to believe it was just a mistake, but in her gut she knew better. Mistakes don't come plated so carefully. It was never loud. Grace never shouted, never made a scene. Her cruelty arrived in whispers and gestures so small that anyone else might dismiss them as accidents. But Allison felt each one like a pinprick, sharp enough to sting and relentless enough to leave scars. On frosty mornings, Grace would appear with a tray of steaming cocoa. 4 mugs, each topped with a swirl of whipped cream and dusted with chocolate shavings. One for Tom, one for Richard, one for each of the boys. The last space on the tray was always empty. Allison's mug never came. "Oh, I must have forgotten," Grace would say, touching Allison's arm with a mock sympathy. "Next time, dear," but there was never a next time. Weeks passed, winters turned to spring, and Allison never once received her own cocoa. Forgotten every single time. Christmas was worse. Grace arrived with a golden box of chocolates, the kind that sparkles under wrapping paper. She handed them out with theatrical flair. Tom received Belgian truffles, perfectly round and decadent. Richard's box held creamy caramels, fresh and rich. Allison's a dusty off-brand candy that looked like it had been dug out from the back of a cupboard. The wrapper was faded edges, frayed. Grace handed it over with the same angelic smile and said, "Special just for you." Then came the birthday photo. It should have been a joyful memory, balloons, candles, laughter. But when Grace posted the picture online, the caption read, "My 3 favorite people." The image showed Tom, Richard, and the birthday boy grinning wide. Allison was missing, cropped out neatly as though she had never been standing there in the first place. To anyone else, these moments were nothing. Forgetfulness, oversight, harmless editing. But to Allison, each one was a deliberate reminder that she didn't belong, that she was an outsider at her own family's table. And worst of all, Tom never noticed. Or maybe he chose not to. Every time Allison tried to bring it up, Tom brushed it off with the same tired line. "That's just how mom shows love." The first time she mentioned the missing cocoa, Tom chuckled as though it were a harmless oversight. She probably just forgot. You know how she gets when she's distracted. When Allison pointed out the chocolates, the faded wrapper in her hand, Tom sighed and said, "She means well, Allie. Mom would never intentionally slight you. You're reading too much into it." It was the same refrain over and over, like a broken record. Grace's forgetfulness wasn't neglect. Grace's special gifts weren't insults. Grace's favorite people post wasn't erasure. According to Tom, it was all just her way of caring. But Allison felt the isolation growing like frost on a windowpane, spreading until it numbed her completely. She wasn't just fighting Grace's quiet hostility. She was battling her husband's refusal to see it. At night, when Tom slept soundly beside her, Allison would stare at the ceiling and wonder if she was losing her mind. Was she overreacting? Was she really imagining it all? And that was Grace's power. She never had to raise her voice. She didn't need to convince Allison she was unworthy. She only needed to keep Tom blind. As long as he remained in her corner, Allison would always be the intruder in her own home. It happened on a summer afternoon in Spokane. The air was heavy with heat, the curtains drawn halfway to block the glare of the sun. Allison had just settled the boys for their nap when Grace appeared at the patio door holding a dainty porcelain plate. "I brought you something sweet," Grace announced, her voice lilting as though she were offering a blessing. On the plate sat a handful of chocolates, each one round and dusted their dark sheen, dulled with age. "These are Belgian truffles," Grace continued, setting the plate down with deliberate care. "A treat for a tired mama." Allison hesitated. The chocolates looked off. Their surfaces were matte, not glossy one, with a corner slightly crushed. Still under Grace's expectant stare, she reached for one and popped it into her mouth. The moment her teeth sank in, she knew something was wrong. Chocolates weren't supposed to crunch. The texture was grainy, almost sandy, and the taste bitter dusty, as if time itself had settled into it. Her tongue recoiled, but she forced herself to swallow, her throat tightening with dread. "Yours is special," Grace said softly, her eyes locked onto Allison's face, watching her reaction with unsettling intensity. "I saved that one just for you." Allison's stomach turned. Something about Grace's tone, the way she lingered on the word special, made her feel cold despite the summer heat. She set the rest of the chocolates aside, wrapping them in a napkin, her hands trembling. She told herself she'd try another later, but deep down she already knew she never would. At first it was just a faint cramp. Allison pressed a hand to her stomach, hoping it would pass. But within minutes the discomfort sharpened into something unbearable. It felt like knives twisting deep inside her, each wave stronger than the last. Sweat broke across her forehead as her body folded in on itself, the pain consuming every inch of her. She stumbled into the bathroom, clutching the counter for balance. The mirror reflected a face she barely recognized, pale, clammy eyes wide with panic. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her legs trembled so violently she could hardly stay upright. Then came the nausea. A sour rush burned her throat as she collapsed onto the cold tile floor. Her body shook uncontrollably, shivers rippling through her, despite the stifling heat outside. The world blurred at the edges, and for a terrifying moment, Allison thought she might not make it out of that bathroom alive. Her mind raced back to Grace's words. "Yours is special. I saved that one just for you. Special." The word echoed cruelly in her head. Curling on the tile, her cheek pressed against the icy floor, Allison fought to stay conscious. Minutes dragged like hours until finally footsteps thundered up the stairs. The bathroom door creaked open, and Tom's voice broke through her haze. "Allie, oh my God, what happened?" She could barely lift her head. "Something I ate," she whispered hoarsely, clutching her stomach, as another wave of pain crashed through her. Tom knelt beside her, panic in his eyes, but Allison said no more. Not yet, because in her gut she knew exactly what had caused it. And Grace's smile still lingered in her mind like a ghost. The next morning, Allison dragged herself out of bed, still pale and weak. Tom had accepted her explanation, something she ate far too easily. He brewed tea, tucked the boys in, and never once pressed her about the chocolates. His silence only deepened the pit in her stomach. As she carried out the trash later that day, something caught her eye. Among crumpled napkins and empty cans sat a foil wrapper flattened against the side of the bin. The lettering was faded, old-fashioned, like something from a decade ago. Curiosity prickled at her. She fished it out carefully with the tip of a spoon and smoothed it against the counter. The words, "Best by December 2012, stared back at her. Her breath stopped. It was 2022. 10 years past its expiration. The chocolate hadn't just been old, it had been ancient. A relic from another time, long past safe consumption. Allison's throat went dry as her mind replayed Grace's voice. "Yours is special. I saved that one just for you. Special. 10 years expired. Hand-picked. Deliberate." Her fingers trembled as she slipped the wrapper into the pocket of her jeans. She didn't throw it away. Somehow discarding it felt wrong, like erasing evidence of a crime no one wanted to acknowledge. That night, when she showed Tom, he squinted at the faded letters and shrugged. She probably didn't realize. Mom's been cleaning out the pantry. Maybe it just got mixed in. Allison's heart sank. Mixed-in Grace had looked her dead in the eye. Grace had watched her chew. Grace had called it special. This wasn't a mistake. It was a message, a warning disguised as kindness. And Tom's refusal to see it left Allison more isolated than ever. For the first time, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. If I don't protect myself, no one will. That night, Allison sat on the edge of their bed, the crumpled chocolate wrapper clutched tightly in her fist. She had shown Tom the faded date, explained the crunch of the bitter taste the way Grace had watched her with that haunting smile. She laid it all out, every detail, her voice shaking with the memory of the pain. But Tom only rubbed his temples, sighing like a man burdened by something trivial. "Allie, you're making this bigger than it is. Mom didn't mean anything by it. She probably didn't check the date, that's all." Allison's throat burned. Didn't mean anything. Grace had called it special. Grace had placed it in her hand and watched her eat it. How could Tom not see she's been doing this for years? Allison whispered, her voice breaking. The little digs, the forgotten drinks, the gifts that aren't gifts. This wasn't an accident, Tom. She wanted me to eat it. Tom turned to her, then his expression tight with frustration. "You always think the worst of her. She's my mother. She raised me. Can't you at least try to believe she means well?" The words hit harder than the cramps ever had. Allison felt her chest hollow out like something inside her had shattered. Because in that moment she realized it wasn't just Grace she was fighting. It was Tom's refusal to see. She sat in silence, her eyes burning, but no tears falling. For the first time she wondered if she was completely alone in this marriage. If the man who had promised to protect her had already chosen his side and it wasn't hers. Allison hadn't told anyone. Not her friends, not the neighbors, not even Tom anymore. Every time she tried, her words were brushed aside, her fears dismissed as paranoia. But one evening, she called her younger brother, Evan. He was 2 years younger, living in Sacramento, working in IT retail. Evan had always been the practical one, the kind who didn't waste time with excuses, the kind who saw problems and immediately searched for solutions. When Allison poured out everything, the chocolates, the wrapper from 2012, Tom's denial, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Evan spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Allie, you need proof. Real proof." Allison frowned, clutching the phone tighter. "Proof? Tom won't listen no matter what I say." "Exactly," Evan said. "That's why you need evidence he can't ignore. Hidden cameras. They're cheap, easy to use. You set them up and the truth speaks for itself." Allison's heart pounded. Cameras. It sounded extreme, like something out of a crime drama. But then she remembered the taste of that chocolate, the way her body had writhed in pain, and Grace's cold, calculated smile. "You think she'll try again?" Allison asked quietly. There was no hesitation in Evan's reply. "If she already has, she will again. The question is whether you'll catch her before it's too late." His words sank into Allison's bones like ice. For the first time she realized she couldn't just wait for Tom to believe her. She would have to make him see. 2 weeks later, the invitation came wrapped in Grace's sugary words. A little family getaway to Whidbey Island. Fresh air, ocean views, and time together, just what we all need. Tom was delighted. The boys were thrilled at the thought of beaches and bug hunts. Grace had even mentioned a private chef to make the weekend extra special. On the surface, it sounded like a gift, a thoughtful gesture from a loving mother. But for Allison, it wasn't a vacation. It was a battlefield. As she folded clothes into their overnight bag, her fingers brushed the small pouch Evan had sent. 5 button-sized cameras, a portable router, and instructions she had already memorized by heart. While Tom talked cheerfully about sandcastles and seafood dinners, Allison packed as if she were heading into war. The drive to Whidbey Island was a breathtaking mist rolling over pine trees, the sea stretching out like glass beneath the ferry. The boys pressed their faces to the window, giggling at the waves. Tom squeezed her hand and smiled, but Allison couldn't return it. She was too busy scanning every mile, every detail, her mind replaying. Grace's smile, the word special, the wrapper that read 2012. When they finally pulled up to the cottage, Grace stood on the porch in a quilted vest, pearls around her neck, arms wide open. Richard held a thermos behind her, his nod stiff but polite. "It's so good to see you all," Grace cooed, bending low to hug the boys before resting a hand on Allison's shoulder. "You look rested." Allison smiled faintly, the kind of smile you wear in enemy territory. Because in her heart, she knew this wasn't a retreat. It was the opening move of a dangerous game. That night, when the cottage finally went quiet, Allison waited. She lay in the bunk bed, her eyes open long after Tom's breathing grew steady and the boys drifted into sleep. The house seemed to hum with silence, broken only by the faint creak of the wooden walls and the whisper of wind outside. Slowly, Allison slipped out from under the blanket. She moved barefoot, every step measured as if even the floorboards might betray her. Her heart hammered so loudly she feared Grace could hear it from the next room. From her bag, she pulled out the pouch Evan had sent. Inside were the button-sized cameras, matte black and almost invisible in the dim light. She turned them over in her palm, whispering to herself like a soldier reciting orders. Camera 1 mounted high in the kitchen cabinet, angled toward the prep counter. Camera 2 tucked above the refrigerator, catching the sink in the trash bin. Camera 3 disguised as a coat hook in the hallway facing Grace's bedroom door. Camera 4 hidden in a vase on the long dining table. Camera 5 set quietly inside her own room insurance in case Grace ever tried to cross the final line. Her hands shook, but her determination didn't. One by one, she placed them, syncing each device to the portable router hidden in the closet. The tiny green lights blinked for a moment before disappearing into darkness, their silent gaze now watching over the house. By the time she crawled back into bed, it was nearly 2 a.m. Tom mumbled in his sleep, rolling over. Alison stared at the ceiling, her body tense, her breath shallow. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was a spy in enemy territory, and tomorrow the game would begin. By morning, the cottage looked no different. The sun spilled through the lace curtains, the boys laughed as they chased each other across the porch, and Grace hummed in the kitchen, her pearls gleaming in the soft light. To anyone else, it was the perfect picture of family harmony. But Alison knew better. Every corner of the house now carried silent witnesses, the cameras hidden like watchful eyes. Each one was ready to record every flick of Grace's wrist, every calculated smile, every slip of malice that she thought no one would ever see. Alison moved through the day with a calm mask, but inside her nerves coiled tight. She pretended to sip the tea Grace poured for her, smiled at Tom's small talk, played with the boys on the deck, all while waiting for the moment when the mask would crack. Every time Grace entered the kitchen alone, Alison's heart lurched. Was this it? Would this be the time? She forced herself to stay patient, to let the hidden lenses do their work. Proof, Evan had said. Hard, undeniable proof. And so the trap lay in silence, woven through porcelain dishes, wooden beams, and the hum of the Wi-Fi router locked away in the closet. No alarms, no confrontations, just a quiet certainty that the truth would surface, and when it did, Alison would be ready. The stage was set, the audience unseen but waiting leaned closer. And somewhere in the house, Grace was preparing her next move, unaware that this time, someone was watching. It was their second day on Whidbey Island when Grace made her announcement. She emerged from the kitchen with a glimmer in her eyes, holding a sleek paper box tied neatly with golden string. The box looked elegant, almost luxurious, as if it had come straight from a boutique deli in the city. "I picked this up from a little shop in town," she said sweetly, placing it on the table with delicate hands. "Imported ingredients, very exclusive. And look," she turned the box so the label faced forward, the cursive writing spelling out one name. Alison. Alison froze. Her name, written in flawless handwriting, stood out like a mark on a target. Grace smiled, pearls glinting at her neck. "This one's just for you, a custom order." Tom glanced up from where he was playing with the boys, grinning without suspicion. "Wow, Mom, you didn't have to go all out like that. That must have cost a fortune." Grace tilted her head, her voice dripping with sugar. "Well, Alison is special. She deserves something unique." The word special hit Alison's ears like a blade. She remembered the special chocolate, the crunch, the bitterness, the pain. Her stomach tightened, though she forced herself to smile politely. She thanked Grace, sliding the box into the fridge when no one was looking. But inside, her pulse raced, because deep down she already knew this wasn't a gift. It was a setup, and this time the cameras were watching. Alison waited until the cottage had gone still, Tom taking the boys out for a walk with Richard, Grace humming somewhere in the kitchen. She slipped quietly into the bedroom, locked the door, and pulled out her laptop. Her fingers trembled as she opened the cloud feed from the cameras. Hours of footage rolled by Grace, wiping counters, humming old hymns, moving dishes in and out of the fridge. Nothing unusual. Then Alison spotted a timestamp, 10:46 a.m. Grace alone in the kitchen, she clicked. The video flickered, and there it was. Grace, wearing latex gloves, moved with the calm precision of someone performing a ritual. From her handbag, she drew out a small black Tupperware box. She opened the lid. Inside, something twitched. Alison's stomach lurched. Grace reached in with a pair of silver tweezers and pulled out a live cockroach, its legs kicking helplessly. Without a flinch, she nestled it into the rice bed of Alison's bento box, tucking it neatly as though placing a jewel into velvet. She sprinkled sesame seeds over the top, smoothing the surface with care, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. Alison slammed the pause button, heart hammering so loud she thought it might burst through her ribs. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting back the urge to scream. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't paranoia. It was deliberate. Grace had tried to poison her with filth, and she'd done it with a smile. Alison sat frozen in front of the laptop, the image of Grace's hands smoothing sesame seeds over the rice burned into her mind. For years, she had told herself that maybe Grace was just forgetful. Maybe she was simply old-fashioned. Maybe the comments, the missing cocoa, the faded chocolates were all coincidences. But this was not forgetfulness. This was not an accident. This was intent. Grace had planned it. She had chosen Alison's name, written it carefully on that box, and then slipped a live cockroach inside as if Alison's very existence deserved nothing better. A chill spread through Alison's chest as the realization sank deeper. Grace didn't just dislike her. Grace wanted to destroy her, to humiliate her, to break her apart piece by piece until she gave up and walked away. Alison's hands curled into fists on the keyboard. Her fear, sharp and choking, began to harden into something else resolved. No more questioning her sanity. No more letting Tom dismiss her pain. No more suffering in silence. She had proof now, hard, undeniable proof. And for the first time, she felt the balance of power shift. Grace had laid her trap, but Alison was the one holding the evidence. As she closed the laptop, Alison's reflection stared back at her, in the dark screen, pale, exhausted, but steady. She knew the battle ahead would not be easy. Grace would fight, deny, twist the truth. Tom might still refuse to see, but Alison had reached her turning point. She was done being the victim. The dining table gleamed under the warm light. Golden strings tied around each elegant bento box shimmered like gifts at a celebration. Grace carried them out one by one, placing each on the table with theatrical care. Tom, she said, sweetly setting a box before her son. Richard, another box, slid gracefully across the wood. The boys giggled as their names appeared on smaller packages. Finally, Grace turned to Alison, her smile sharp beneath the softness. She placed a box directly in front of her, tied tighter than the rest, her name written in flowing cursive. Alison, I asked them to make yours extra delicate, Grace announced, her eyes glinting. You've always been sensitive. Go on, open it. I want to see your face. The room fell silent. Tom, distracted, was cutting food for the youngest boy, unaware of the tension. Richard glanced up, his expression unreadable. Grace leaned forward, anticipation shining in her eyes. Alison looked at the box. She could almost hear the faint echo of Grace's voice from the video. Yours is special. Her stomach twisted, but not with fear. This time it was anger, cold, steady anger. With deliberate calm, Alison picked up the box. Grace's smile widened. Tom finally looked over, curious. And then, without a word, Alison walked to the trash can, lifted the lid, and dropped the box inside. The thud echoed like a gunshot. Tom jerked upright. What the hell, Allie, that cost over $100? Grace froze, her face draining of color. Richard set down his fork, silent, watching. Alison turned back slowly, her eyes locked on Grace. For the first time in years, she felt no fear, only clarity. The silence after the box hit the trash was suffocating. Tom's voice broke first, sharp with anger. Allie, what are you doing? That was, but Alison didn't answer. Instead, she walked calmly to the bedroom, her footsteps steady, and returned with her laptop in hand. She set it on the dining table right beside Grace's delicate teacup. Grace's smile twitched. What is this? She asked, her voice high, brittle. You'll see, Alison said, her tone quiet but unshakable. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, opening the saved file. The screen glowed, grainy footage filling the room. The first angle showed Grace shutting the kitchen door, slipping on latex gloves. Then came the black Tupperware box, the silver tweezers, and the writhing cockroach. Gasps rippled through the room. Tom's fork clattered against his plate. Oh my God, he whispered. Alison didn't stop. She switched to the second camera, a clear side profile of Grace, her face unmistakable, as she nestled the insect into the rice-sprinkled sesame seeds and smoothed it over with almost maternal care. The boys whimpered, clinging to Tom's arms. Richard sat frozen, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with rage. Alison hit pause. The image froze on Grace's smile, that soft, practiced smile that had fooled everyone for years. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. And then Alison spoke, her voice cutting through the air like glass special. That's what you called it, Grace. Special just for me. For a long moment, Grace just stared at the frozen image on the laptop screen, her own face smiling as she poisoned Allison's food. Her pearls gleamed under the light, but suddenly they looked more like shackles than ornaments. Grace, Tom's voice cracked. Please tell me this isn't what it looks like. The room held its breath. Grace's lips twitched, her eyes darting, searching for some way out. But then something inside her snapped. Her voice rose sharp and venomous. She doesn't belong here. The boys flinched, clinging tighter to Tom. Grace slammed her palm against the table, the porcelain teacup rattling violently. Her face twisted, no longer the polished mask of elegance, but raw hatred. From the moment you brought her home, she spat, glaring at Alison. She stole you from me. She made you forget who raised you, who sacrificed everything for you. And now you expect me to sit here and smile while she pretends to be part of this family. Tom shook his head, disbelief clouding his face. Mom, this isn't love. This is don't you dare, Grace screamed, her voice cracking. I gave you life, Thomas, and she jabbed a trembling finger toward Alison. She thinks she's better than me, but she'll never be one of us. Never, the words cut through the air like shards of glass. Alison's chest ached, but for the first time she didn't shrink back. She held Grace's gaze, unflinching, steady, refusing to let the venom sink in, and in that silence everyone finally saw it. Grace's mask had shattered. For years, Richard had been silent, the calm shadow beside Grace's commanding presence. He was the steady one, the peacemaker, the man who swallowed words to keep peace at the dinner table. But tonight something broke. He rose from his chair, his usually placid face thunderous. His voice low and measured cut through Grace's shrieks like the crack of a gavel. You tried to poison the mother of my grandchildren. The words hit the air like a sentence passed down in a courtroom. Grace's mouth opened, but no sound came. Richard's hand trembled on the back of his chair, his jaw locked. You endangered children who could have eaten from that box, he continued, eyes blazing. You've disgraced this family beyond repair. Tom's face went pale. His gaze darted between the paused video, the terrified boys clutching his arms, and the mother he had defended for so long. The denial that once shielded him crumbled piece by piece until there was nothing left but horror. Mom! His voice cracked, breaking under the weight of betrayal. No, please tell me this isn't real. But Grace said nothing. She only glared at the Alison venom dripping from her silence. And in that silence, Tom finally understood. For the first time, he turned fully toward Alison, not with dismissal, not with doubt, but with raw regret in his eyes. He pulled the boys closer, his hands trembling. Allie, he whispered, voice shaking. I'm so sorry. You were right. You were right all along. For Alison, it wasn't victory. Not yet. But as she met Tom's gaze steady and broken, she felt something shift. For the first time in years, she was no longer standing alone. The house was heavy with silence after the confrontation. Grace had stormed out of the dining room, her shrill protest echoing down the hallway, but no one followed her. Richard sat rigid in his chair, his face buried in his hands. The boys clung to Tom, their small bodies trembling. Alison packed in silence. Every movement, folding pajamas, gathering toothbrushes, stuffing clothes into bags, felt urgent, mechanical, like a soldier preparing to evacuate. Her hands shook, but her mind was clear. They could not stay here another night. By midnight, the cottage was dark except for the headlights cutting across the gravel driveway. Tom loaded the bags into the car, while Alison strapped the boys into their seats, whispering promises of safety. The ferry would be running until dawn, and they intended to be on it. As Tom climbed into the driver's seat, he reached over and grabbed Alison's hand. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his eyes hollow with guilt. Allie, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. I should have believed you. I've been so blind, and I nearly let her destroy you. Alison turned her head, watching his face illuminated by the faint dashboard light. For a long time, she said nothing. Then quietly she replied, You should be sorry. But at least now, you finally see her. Tom nodded, tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. He squeezed her hand harder, as though afraid she might slip away like smoke. The ferry pulled away from the island just before 2 a.m., the black water stretching endlessly under the moonlight. In the back seat, the boys had already fallen asleep, their small breaths steady and peaceful. Alison stared out the window at the shrinking silhouette of Whidbey Island, her heart still racing. But for the first time in years, she felt it, the faint, fragile taste of freedom. The morning after their escape, Allison walked into the Seattle police station with the flash drive clutched in her hand. Her steps were heavy, but her resolve was unshakable. For years, she had carried the burden in silence. Now she carried evidence. The officer at the front desk raised an eyebrow as she slid the drive across the counter. "There is video on this," Allison said, her voice steady. "It shows my mother-in-law tampering with my food deliberately. I believe she's a danger to me and my children." The officer plugged it in. As the grainy footage rolled Grace's gloved hands, the writhing cockroach, the sesame seeds falling like a twisted garnish, the officer's face hardened. He hit pause halfway through and looked at Allison. "Mom," he said firmly, "this qualifies as criminal endangerment. If your children had eaten this, it could have been catastrophic." "Are you pressing charges?" Allison's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Yes, absolutely." By the end of the week, a restraining order was in place. Grace was forbidden from contacting Allison, from approaching the children, from stepping foot on their property. Any violation would mean arrest. When Tom read the papers, his hands shook. For the first time, he understood the full weight of what his mother had done. And for the first time, Allison felt a strange, quiet relief. The law was no longer blind to her suffering. Justice had spoken. Grace's downfall came faster than anyone expected. Within months, Richard filed for divorce. His voice, once calm and steady, was filled with quiet steel when he told Allison over the phone, "I should have stepped in sooner." She's unraveling Allison. She bans cell phones from the house, accuses neighbors of spying, talks to herself for hours. "I can't do it anymore. I won't." The papers were signed. Richard walked away, and with him went the last thread of respect Grace had in her community. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors avoided her. Church pews where she once sat proudly now seemed to shrink without her presence. And then came the messages. Blocked calls in the middle of the night. Emails from burner accounts. Handwritten letters with no return address, alternating between syrupy apologies and venomous rants. "I only wanted what's best for my son. You've poisoned him against me. You'll regret this." Allison saved every one of them, filing them neatly in a folder marked evidence. But the day Grace finally called from a traceable number, her voice was broken, raspy, nothing like the woman who once carried herself with pearls and pride. "Allison," she whispered, "thank God you answered. I have nothing. Richard is gone. I can't pay rent, can't buy food. Please, I didn't mean for it to go so far." Allison stood by the window watching her boys chase each other in the yard, their laughter like sunlight. She listened, but her heart was steady cold. "You wanted me gone, Grace," she said quietly. "Now you are." There was a pause, a ragged breath on the other end. Grace whimpered, "You're a mother. You know what it's like to sacrifice everything. Don't let me starve." Allison's hand didn't tremble. Her reply was as sharp as steel. "If you're hungry, maybe try eating what you once served me." And then she hung up. For the first time in years, Allison felt truly free. Not because Grace had lost everything, but because her power over Allison was gone forever. Weeks passed. The phone stopped ringing. The letters stopped coming. For the first time in years, Allison could sit on the porch swing with a cup of tea and not feel the weight of Grace's shadow pressing in on her. The boys laughed in the yard, their voices carrying on the breeze. Tom sat beside her, quieter these days, humbled but more present than ever. Sometimes he would simply watch her as though trying to memorize the strength in her eyes he had once doubted. Allison knew something now, something she wished she had known years earlier. Freedom doesn't come when your enemy disappears. It comes when their power over you is broken. Grace had tried to control her with poisoned kindness, with carefully sharpened words, with years of manipulation. But Allison had drawn a line. She had said enough. And that was the moment she was freed. As the sun dipped low over Seattle, Allison closed her eyes, breathing in the peace she had fought for. Grace was gone, yes. But more importantly, Grace's hold on her was gone forever. She was no longer the frightened daughter-in-law who swallowed hurt in silence. She was a mother, a wife, a woman who had faced cruelty and chosen strength. And in that choice, she had found freedom. This story reminds us of something powerful. Sometimes the greatest battles we fight are not with strangers, but with those closest to us. Toxic control often hides behind smiles, kind words, or even the excuse of love. But real love never poisons, never manipulates, never breaks you down to make itself feel stronger. The moment we draw boundaries when we say enough is the moment we begin to reclaim our lives. Freedom is not about waiting for toxic people to disappear. It's about choosing not to let their control define us anymore. Like Allison, we all have the strength to stand up, protect our peace, and finally breathe freely again. If this story touched you, if you believe in the power of courage and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to Pieces of Soul. Every story here carries a piece of truth, a lesson, and a reminder that you are never alone in your struggles. Hit the bell so you won't miss the next story that might change the way you see your own life.